Picture this. The year is 1914. Europe is engulfed in the bloodiest conflict humanity had ever seen. Trenches are already filling with millions of dead. Empires are crumbling. And across the Atlantic, the richest and fastest growing nation on earth simply watches, refusing to pick a side, while quietly pouring fuel on one army's fire. When World War I broke out in late July 1914, President Woodrow Wilson immediately declared strict U.S. neutrality on August 4th, urging Americans to be impartial in thought as well as in action. This policy reflected deep-seated isolationist sentiment. After avoiding European wars for over a century, most citizens wanted no part in what they saw as a distant imperial squabble. Wilson believed staying out would preserve American moral authority and allow focus on progressive domestic reforms. Yet economic reality undermined pure neutrality almost instantly. Britain's powerful Royal Navy imposed a tight blockade on Germany, halting nearly all neutral trade with the Central Powers while permitting unrestricted commerce with the Allies. American farmers, manufacturers, and bankers rushed to fill the gap, exporting vast quantities of wheat, cotton, steel, oil, and especially munitions to Britain and France. By 1915, these exports had skyrocketed, and to finance them, U.S. banks, led by J.P. Morgan, arranged huge private loans to the Allied governments, eventually reaching nearly $2.5 billion before America entered the war. Germany protested fiercely, labeling this trade as unneutral aid to its enemies. The situation turned explosive in May 1915 when the German submarine U-20 torpedoed the British passenger liner RMS Lusitania off the Irish coast, killing 1,198 civilians, including 128 Americans. The sinking triggered widespread fury in the United States. Newspapers screamed betrayal, and public opinion began tilting against Germany. Wilson responded with strong diplomatic notes demanding an end to attacks on neutral shipping and passenger vessels, but he still avoided war. Germany temporarily suspended unrestricted submarine warfare to avoid provoking America further. Tensions simmered for another year and a half until early 1917, when Berlin, desperate after the British blockade strangled its economy, resumed all-out U-boat attacks on any vessel approaching Allied ports. Several U.S. merchant ships were sunk in rapid succession, claiming American lives and cargo. Then, in January 1917, British codebreakers intercepted and decoded the infamous Zimmermann telegram. Germany's foreign minister proposed a military alliance to Mexico, offering to restore Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona if Mexico joined the war against the United States. When the telegram's contents were made public in March, outrage exploded across America. Combined with ongoing sinkings, it destroyed the last remnants of neutrality's credibility and pushed the nation toward war. On April 2, 1917, President Wilson stood before a joint session of Congress and requested a declaration of war against Imperial Germany, declaring that the world must be made safe for democracy. 4 days later, the Senate and House voted overwhelmingly to join the Allies. Although American troops would not reach the Western Front in large numbers until mid-1918, the United States had already been deeply entangled financially for over 2 years. Private American loans to Britain and France began in earnest in 1915, coordinated largely through J.P. Morgan and Company, which acted as purchasing agent for the British government. These credits allowed the Allies to buy American goods on a massive scale without immediate cash payment. By April 1917, the total stood at roughly $2.3 to $2.5 billion, enormous sums for the era. Once America declared war, the financial relationship shifted to official government lending. Between 1917 and 1920, the U.S. Treasury advanced more than $10 billion in direct loans to the Allied powers, with the United Kingdom receiving the single largest portion, approximately $4.277 billion. France borrowed about $2.9 billion, while smaller amounts went to Italy, Belgium, and others. These funds purchased artillery, rifles, airplanes, locomotives, food, coal, and countless other necessities that kept Allied armies fighting. Without this lifeline, Britain, already exhausted by 3 years of total war, might have been forced to seek peace on German terms much earlier. The loans transformed the United States overnight from a net debtor nation, owing about $3.7 billion to Europe before 1914, into the world's greatest creditor. American factories operated around the clock, employment soared, and the economy experienced an unprecedented wartime boom. Yet the money came with expectations. Washington insisted the loans were genuine debts, not gifts, to be repaid with interest after victory. Britain, in particular, used much of the borrowed funds to pay American suppliers directly, meaning a significant portion simply cycled back into the U.S. economy. This arrangement cemented America's emerging role as global financial powerhouse and subtly shifted the balance of power within the Anglo-American partnership toward Washington. The guns fell silent on November 11, 1918, but the financial battles were only beginning. At the Paris Peace Conference in 1919, Britain and France pushed for massive German reparations under Article 231 of the Treaty of Versailles, the infamous war guilt clause, partly to rebuild their shattered economies and partly to repay their American creditors. Total reparations were set at 132 billion gold marks, about $33 billion then, an amount many economists considered impossible for Germany to pay. Britain and France repeatedly argued that their ability to repay U.S. war loans depended entirely on collecting from Berlin, creating what became known as the debt reparations tangle. The United States, under Presidents Wilson, Harding, and Coolidge, rejected any cancellation or formal linking of the debts, viewing them as solemn obligations. By the early 1920s, Britain owed the U.S. Treasury roughly $4.4 billion principal plus interest. Lengthy negotiations culminated in the 1923 Anglo-American debt settlement. Britain agreed to repay over 62 years at 3 to 3.5% interest, reducing the effective burden but still imposing severe strain on its fragile post-war finances. To ease German payments and keep the cycle alive, American bankers devised the Dawes Plan in 1924, which restructured reparations, lowered annual amounts, and provided Germany with large U.S. loans, ironically funded by American investors. The 1929 Young Plan further reduced reparations and extended timelines, and this created a precarious triangular flow. Wall Street lent to Germany, Germany paid reparations to the Allies, and the Allies repaid America. The system held until the Wall Street crash of October 1929 triggered the Great Depression. Global trade collapsed, unemployment soared, and Germany, hit hardest, defaulted on reparations in 1931. At the 1932 Lausanne Conference, reparations were effectively canceled, but the U.S. refused to forgive Allied debts in response. Britain and France suspended payments in 1933 to 1934. By June 1934, all major debtors except Finland had defaulted. The unpaid principal and accrued interest eventually exceeded $16 billion in today's terms. These defaults bred deep resentment on both sides. Americans felt betrayed by allies who borrowed freely in war but refused to honor commitments in peace, while Britain saw the rigid U.S. stance as callous, accelerating Britain's economic decline and imperial retreat. The unresolved war debts symbolized and accelerated the decisive transfer of global leadership from London to Washington, closing one era of Anglo-American relations and opening another defined by American predominance.